When you play the Game of Thrones, you
subscribe and like,
or you die. There is no middle ground.
Alright, hello YouTube, welcome back to the Grease Comedy channel. Today's video, we're going to be continuing our react series to Preston Jacob's Song of Ice and Fire, Dragonless Ambitions. This will be part 3. And I'm really happy you guys have been liking these videos. They've been some of my most viewed videos for probably the last month or two. So I just want to give you guys a massive shout out. I'm glad you guys like these. I'm going to keep doing these since you guys like them, and we'll at least get through this series. I definitely will take more suggestions when we get to part 4 and 5 towards the end of this series, as we're only middle of the way through. And I might do a poll for that, so stay tuned on that on the community page if you wanted to see that. Again, subscribe to Preston Jacobs. The link for this original video will be in the comments if you wanted it without my commentary. That'll be there to go look at it and to watch. And again, massive shout out to Preston Jacobs for allowing me to do this as well. So let's get into it. Let's do a little bit of a recap for the past 2 videos if you guys have not seen them. So in the first 2 parts, it was about establishing who was telling us the events, the Maesters, and what was the personal bias. And there seemed like there was a lot of suspicious things on how we get information, and a lot of it is reported in a way that helps the Greens or makes the Maesters look good, and a lot of it feels like a smear campaign on the Blacks. We looked at a lot of key events that would have led to the Dance of the Dragons and the killing of the dragons. We look at events surrounding marriages, so Viserys and Alicent, Rhaenyra and Laenor. We looked at actual events that happened right before the Dance of the Dragons, whether that's the peace terms that were given to Rhaenyra right before the start, or whether that was the information and how the Maesters are in this position to kind of control the way information is said. And I made this idea that when we look at our own world, texting is something that is our main form, a lot of people's main use of communication, right? Texting, calling, all that stuff. And a lot of that can be taken the wrong way. And that's the way I think a lot of information is taken the wrong way in this series, with the Maesters being the people that are the intelligent ones that can read usually. So that was kind of a lot of what was covered in the first 2. And this third video, we're going to continue on that cycle. So let's get into it, and let's get into part 3.
So in part 1, we talked about how House Hightower and the Maesters influenced Targaryen succession in order to make Alicent Hightower queen and her son Aegon king over Rhaenyra and Daemon. This led to the Dance of the Dragons, where the Blacks seriously outgunned the Greens. But with the use of some Maester and Hightower...
So I will say, he says majorly outgunned them. I would tend to disagree. I think the Blacks did have the advantage, but I think the Greens in their own right had their advantages as well. And I've talked about that in the last video, but just notably, they had more funds, they had Vhagar, they had more time to plan, they were the family on the throne, which gives them more legitimacy just based upon the public's eye. So I think the Greens did have a lot of things that were going their way, but I think he is right. The Blacks did have the advantage at the start of the war.
Our trickery at Storm's End, Tumbleton, and Maidenpool,
yes,
the Greens were able to prevail. But then a very weird event occurs, the storming of the Dragon Pit at King's Landing. A one-armed prophet named the Shepherd convinces hundreds...
So this is going to get us into this idea of, do we connect the faith with this idea of the Maesters and the Hightowers? Do we make that connection? And I think there is going to be a lot of evidence provided in here, but the Hightowers are very instrumental into the founding of the faith and giving them their place of worship, right? A lot of that comes from the Hightowers. So again, that is a connection we're going to have here, and that I think is what probably Preston Jacobs is going to talk about.
Hundreds, if not thousands of people to storm the dragon pits to kill the dragons. Hundreds of people die. The stranger comes, he comes, he comes, to scourge us for our sins. Prayers cannot stay his wrath, no more than tears can quench the flames of dragons. Only blood can do that.
So I do want to add to this point, because I know he's going to go with the faith could have been behind, I'm assuming, building up this storming of the Dragon Pit. But I want to talk about some of the context behind why that storming does happen. One, Rhaenyra is doing a terrible job of ruling. She's not very well liked at this point. At one point, she was, the darling of the realm. She's not that anymore. Rhaenyra is not an attractive woman anymore, is what we're said. She's kind of overweight. She just doesn't look as attractive anymore. And You also pair that with how she's treating people. She doesn't seem to care about them, and her tax policies are horrible. Like, the economic status right now of King's Landing is in shambles. It's very comparable to like King's Landing right before Stannis attacks and Clash. Very similar circumstances where we're seeing the people start to turn, and it starts to turn into violence. When people can't feed themselves, well, it's either death and starving and watching maybe your children die, or taking action. And that's when the people get their power, when they have nothing left to lose. And when we talk about the Targaryens, another facet that's going to be brought into with the faith is this whole idea of how much power does the faith have? And the whole thing back when the Targaryens were at their height, so you look at Jaehaerys's reign, and even like right at the end of Maegor's when he takes care of the faith and disarms them, the faith is able to, yes, like control public opinion at times, but the thing that they were not able to do with the faith was really pose an actual threat to during Jaehaerys's reign and even Viserys's, where when you look at when Aenys was king, the faith was much more able to pose more of a threat because Aenys wasn't willing to do anything. So this could be an idea of the faith seeing their opportunity to gain some power with the dragons being gone, and that's what, maybe that's what they ended up doing here. So I just wanted to give some context as to why the storming of the dragon pits even happens.
Kill them! Kill them! So as we can see, the motivation for killing the dragons is religious in nature. The dragons are seen as demons and an affront to the faith of the...
I get what he's talking about, but again, I think this is much more of the people are very desperate. They want to get behind someone, and they want to get behind an ideology. I know this is, not a good cause or anything, but it's the same way with World War II and Nazi Germany. All of these people were desperate. They were struggling to feed their families. The economy of Germany was terrible. And they turned to this person in Hitler who was a good speaker. And he was able to persuade them, that Germany could be brought back to its heights and all these things. And we know that's not the case. And he did horrible acts. But that's kind of the same idea that's happening here. People are desperate, and they are willing to go with other causes if that means feeding themselves.
In fact, the first dragon to die is killed by Hob the Hewer, who calls out the names of the seven when he swings. Now, Gildain first describes the crowd as not being very well armed, but then later claims they have swords, crossbows, and spears. In fact, the second dragon dies from a spear to the eye from the Burning Knight, who dons heavy armor. A crowd with swords, spears, and axes takes down the third dragon, and a crossbow to the eye and some falling rubble kills the fourth.
These are all great points. How do these apparent peasants, or just villagers, or just common city folk getting all these weapons? We know for a fact that wouldn't happen with just a normal person. If we look at, for instance, I got done doing John's chapter. One of the key points of that is none of these people that have come to the wall have probably ever held a sword. A sword is probably worth more than what their entire family owned. How are these people getting all of these weapons? And maybe you could point to, stealing from armories or whatnot, but that is an interesting question, how they are armed.
For some reason, Syrax shows up to the dragon pit and is either killed by a crossbowman or a spearman. Now, it's quite weird that this unruly mob is so well armed, but it's also quite weird that they know how to kill dragons. At least 2 of the 5 dragons are attacked at the eyes. And Tyrion tells us in A Dance with Dragons that...
Which could be happenstance. There was just so many people there that eventually one of them just hit the dragon in the eye, which could be possible. But again, I think that's another great point. I mean, there is a little bit of suspicion there.
Shooting a dragon in the eye is the way to kill it, at least according to Septon Barth. Could they have also used knowledge from Septon Barth's work to call Syrax to the pit? Syrax heading to the pit is very reminiscent of Drogon's mysterious return in A Dance with Dragons. Nonetheless, we seem to have a religious leader sending religious men to kill dragons using knowledge from a religious source. But why would the Faith of the Seven want to kill dragons? Well, let's go back to the reign of the second...
Yeah, and this is definitely where you need to go back if you want to understand why the Faith do not like the Targaryens. And just think about it, right? The Targaryens view themselves as these godly kind of figures where they're above men. And that is just not good when you look at a religion, right? Because religion does not have that. And the Targaryens themselves are not of the Seven, right? We see that a lot. They are just, in their origins anyway, are not of the Seven. They are people that practice incest. These are all things that the Faith doesn't like. It's the same idea if we look at religion today, where people that are very scientific may not agree with the Bible, for instance. It's the same idea here where some things with the seven maybe don't add up with the dragons for the Targaryens, and these Targaryens not being able to get sick. Some of that probably doesn't add up to the seven, and that can kind of do a clear ideology of why the faith does not like the Targaryens. And you just have the other idea of Maegor being extremely cruel to them. Well, I think it's deservedly so, but I don't know, arming themselves and basically going into full rebellion on the crown, and Maegor disarms them. So again, that's another reason why.
Targaryen king Aenys the First. Now the Faith of the Seven hates incest.
Yep.
So when Aenys' brother Maegor tried to marry his sister, the High Septon protested. In the end, Maegor ended up marrying the High Septon's niece, who happened to be a Hightower. But she didn't produce any kids, so Maegor took on a second wife. As it turns out, the Faith of the Seven also hates polygamy, so Maegor was exiled. To repair the relationship...
But think about that. That's a double-edged sword. If we look at Aegon the Conqueror, right, who did both of those things. He had two wives, and both of them were his sisters. But think about the power there. The Faith didn't really do anything to Aegon. They were still armed, but they didn't really do anything to Aegon because they realized his power level. They only do it when Aenys becomes king because he's a weak king.
With the Seven, Aenys takes on a Septon as hand. So we can really see how much power the Faith of the Seven has over the Targaryens during this period.
Yes, especially early on.
Aenys dies, and Maegor returns from exile and usurps the throne from Aenys' children. Maegor tells the Faith to fuck itself and kills thousands of men in the Faith Militant. The Faith Militant is banned, and we see a decline in the Faith's power. Although Maegor's successor Jaehaerys takes on Septon Barth as his hand, he also ends religious courts. And while the Targaryens give up...
Again, and we can see why Jaehaerys does this, right? So Jaehaerys does not want to give the Faith too much power, but he also doesn't want to thrust them to the side and, insult them further. He does want to reconciliate, them, right? And that's something Jaehaerys does really well throughout his reign. He's someone that is able to teeter on the middle ground of Maegor and Aenys, where they're two extremes. Jaehaerys is able to be a figure that has enough respect and or fear, but he doesn't go the cool route, right? He shows his strength, but doesn't go the full route, which is what Aenys should have done, but he didn't.
Polygamy, Jaehaerys does marry his sister, Alysanne.
Yes.
Fast forward to the High
Which the Faith wasn't exactly happy with, but they couldn't really do anything about it. And that was the big thing there.
And you have the restoration of the Faith's military and courts, along with a strict no incest policy. So it seems the more powerful the king, the less powerful the Faith.
Yes.
And the less powerful the king, the more powerful the Faith.
Exactly, because the Faith can manipulate events, and depending on the king, they can get away with more. They can go with showing and strutting their power, because a strong king is going to go to the Faith and go, what are you going to do about it, right? Like, what if you don't like what I'm doing, what are you going to do about that? And especially if you're a strong king and you're loved, like someone like Jaehaerys, the Faith just doesn't have a route to attack you, right? If the kingdoms are doing well, people are really well fed and they're doing well, and you're in a time of peace, people are not going to start denouncing that king that gave them that, especially when you have other characters like Aenys and Maegor. And that's something that's very hard to understand, I think, for some people, is that the Faith, a lot of their power is rooted, especially when you have a bad king or queen. And I mentioned queen there because of Rhaenyra, and she doesn't do a good job.
Since dragons are used to suppress the Faith's power, it stands to reason that the Faith would want to destroy them.
Yes, exactly.
And it makes me wonder about Septon Barth's tenure as Hand of the King. Did he take the job just so he could research dragons? Now, of course, the Citadel, the High Towers, and the Faith of the Seven are all in Oldtown, and each roughly correspond to the city's mind, body, and soul. The High Towers are great patrons of the Faith, and were instrumental in the founding of the Citadel. We know that the High Towers followed the Faith's direction when Aegon the Conqueror arrived in Westeros, and we know that the High Septon under Aenys was a High Tower. Since the High Septon is elected by the most devout, it stands to reason that the High Towers have numerous allies within the Faith. Keep in mind, it seems that the High Towers...
And that's the point. If you think about how many High Towers, we'll even get to the main story, have been in the Faith and high ranks, it's off the charts. It's so hard, you can't separate them to almost to a point where it's kind of like, I think this is a decent example, the Starks and the Night's Watch. They're so interchangeable when it comes to the Night's Watch. For all they say, they don't take part in the kingdoms, they have more love of the Starks than probably the Lannisters, for instance. And that's the point I think he's trying to make here, is that, they're not like a bannerman of the High Towers or anything, but like they're so deeply rooted and connected with each other.
Towers started the war because they didn't like Daemon Targaryen, who they likened to Maegor. And while Maegor killed a few Maesters, he killed thousands in the faith.
Yes.
The point of all of this is that Marwyn might actually be incorrect. It may be the Septons that are guilty of killing the dragons and not the Maesters. Like the Maesters, the Septons are a network of advisors all over Westeros.
Again, I think it's a combination of both. I think this is a perfect storm for people that were not a fan of the dragons, which is pretty much everybody that wasn't Targaryens. That you could incite rebellion, you could incite people to not like the Targaryens, like we've talked about in this video, and then you also have the Maesters, who do a lot of sketchy stuff, like we've talked about in the last two videos.
And they have a much stronger motive for killing off dragons. However, since both parties seem to be connected to the High Towers, there is some guilt by association. In The Rogue Prince, Otto Hightower writes his brother in Oldtown, saying that under no circumstances can Daemon become king. Of course, this makes one ask, what can his brother do about it? Otto Hightower's command to his brother only makes sense if his brother has control over either the Maesters, the Septons, or both. But an Oldtown conspiracy...
So the context I want to add to the quote he just said, let me pull it back up on screen. On no account can Prince Daemon be allowed to ascend to the Iron Throne. The hand wrote his brother, Lord of... So, I think this was more Otto Hightower just kind of venting to his brother. I don't think he was ordering a command here. I think he was just Otto just kind of informing his brother who Daemon is and why he cannot be allowed to sit the Iron Throne because of this reason or that reason. You could make the connection maybe that, he passed this on to the faith and things like that, which is also possible. That could be another reason of why he tells his brother that, or could be another warning of, hey, get ready, there could be war. So I think there's a lot more meanings than just an order, basically.
It only makes sense if his brother has control over either the Maesters, the Septons, or both. But an Oldtown conspiracy against the Targaryens couldn't go too far. If a single member of the conspiracy spilled the beans to the Targaryens, the Hightowers, the Septons, and the Maesters would suffer dearly. Daemon and Viserys even have an uncle named Vaegon who was an Archmaester at the Citadel. If he caught wind of any conspiracy, the Hightowers would be toast. So people like the Maester at Storm's End, the Maester at Maidenpool, and the Shepherd would have to be tight-lipped and loyal. But there is something that's astoundingly weird about House Hightower. The Hightowers have strong connections to both the Citadel and the Faith of the Seven, and yet they also love sorcery. Specifically, they are said to dabble in necromancy. This is a bit odd, as Marwyn claims the Citadel doesn't like magic.
So I actually did not know that. I didn't know that they did do things like that, so that is an interesting note. But if that is true, I'm hoping he presents evidence of that, but I didn't know that was a thing.
Doesn't really believe it exists. Qyburn was supposedly kicked out of the Citadel for practicing necromancy.
Exactly, like we see all these characters who
the
practice magic are not well loved.
Thousands of years ago, but why would the Maesters continue to associate with such men of superstition? Well, besides being linked geographically, the three are also linked in prophecy. During Aegon's conquest, the High Septon had a vision. If Oldtown took up arms against the dragon, Oldtown would burn, and the High Tower and the Citadel and the Starry Sept would be cast down and destroyed.
I don't know if I believe he had a vision. I think it's more like, hey, all these big armies that we've, had against the Aegon the Conqueror that have gotten burned to a crisp. Hey, Harrenhal, yeah, that's what's going to happen to us if we don't, bow down. I think that's more or less what happened, not a vision. That's kind of far-fetched to me.
Does it refer to just Aegon, or does it refer to all Targaryens? Since we're looking at the destruction of Oldtown, the Septons, the Maesters, and the High
I don't
Towers
believe this part, though. I think this is a little far-fetched. I think he meant just Aegon.
To all Targaryens, this creates quite a pickle for those in Oldtown. People may disagree with the Targaryen ways, but they can't take up arms against them, or at least not in a traditional way. Now, this prophecy explains a lot about the Hightowers.
And again, if you took up arms against the Targaryens, just the Hightowers, the Mace, whatever, Oldtown basically takes up arms against the House Targaryen, they would die. Very surface level stuff, because it's like, how would you take up arms against House Targaryen? Like, Who's gonna back House Hightower just by themselves? I don't know.
It explains
I
why they're
think that's a
neutral in
weird
almost
point,
every
but
war, despite commanding an incredibly large army. It explains why Maegor fought the Faith in King's Landing and in the Riverlands, but never in Oldtown. It explains why the Hightowers might use unconventional means to trick the Targaryens to fight themselves. It also explains a weird event.
I get what he's saying here, and I think it's an interesting idea, but I completely disagree. I personally think that you look at the way the Hightowers have played the game, right? And he references back to all these points where they don't take up arms. But the Hightowers didn't take up arms even before that vision, right? The Hightowers did not join the Gardeners in, the Field of Fire. They didn't join them there. They stayed. They were smart enough to realize that that was stupid. And if you look at the Hightowers and even the Tyrells, again, the Tyrells are also married into the Hightowers. Their strategy has always been, let's not get our hands dirty, and let's just kind of sit back and watch. And then, boom, go to the winning side. It's always been their strategy. It's a very sound strategy, and it's why they're so successful even to now. I don't think that really has anything to do with a prophecy, especially when the quote-unquote prophecy, which I've told you guys, or I guess, I don't know if it's a prophecy, a dream, vision, whatever. I've told you probably didn't actually happen. It was more like this guy hadn't been eating probably for a while, and he just came to his senses. So, again, for me, I get what he's saying here. I'm not a huge fan of this idea, though.
The dragons. After successfully conquering and defending Tumbleton, Hightower forces disband rather than continuing on to attack King's Landing, and thus Oldtown forces have never faced a Targaryen in battle. Now, it seems completely understandable that our Oldtown triad would want to destroy the Targaryens. Their mere existence is a harbinger of doom for the city. Except Marwyn says the Citadel doesn't believe in prophecy, so we're back to wondering why they would help the Faith and the Hightowers. Of course, it may be that...
Again, I mean, he's trying to connect that there. I just don't think that works for me. But again, it could work to you guys. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments. I think that's a very loose connection.
The Citadel does believe in prophecy, and they just want a monopoly on its understanding. That may explain why Maester Luwin wants to control Bran's dreams, and why Maester Coleman wants to control Sweet Robin's dreams, and why Maester...
Okay, now we're really stretching it. Like, I haven't really had like major problems with a lot of what Preston Jacobs has said, but I think this part, controlling their dreams, I mean, a lot of it's been about these people don't want to dream, or it just makes sense so they can actually sleep. I don't think it's about controlling prophecy, because I don't think Luwin even believes that Bran's dreams are prophecy. He thinks the way I interpret Luwin's view on Bran's dreams is just Bran's just having some dreams. I think that's all it is, and it's just to help Bran sleep. But maybe you can make this connection.
Shireen to believe her dreams are meaningless, and why Maester Tomon wants...
And again, I think if you're looking at the way the Maesters are formulated, they are based on reality. And the way we look at reality right now is dreams are, for the most part, meaningless. Sometimes your dreams, like in real life, can show maybe your deepest fears, or maybe can show things you're worried about. So, for instance, let's say you're a procrastinator. You might have a dream where you didn't do your work in time and you got in trouble for it, or you didn't turn in your homework, whatever.
Tiora to believe that her dreams are meaningless. It's one thing to tell a child there's no Easter Bunny. It's another to make it an official talking point for your entire institution. Then again, Crescent seems rather sincere in his belief that Shireen's dreams are meaningless. Still, it seems quite odd that the Maesters are such zealous skeptics in a world that clearly has magic. Of course, it may be that the Citadel does the Hightower's bidding because Hightower men have infiltrated the institution. In fact, we know this has happened to...
I agree to disagree, because by the time a lot of the Maesters he referenced there, like Crescent, like Luwin, all these people, for the most part, magic has actually been dead in Westeros for a long time. Like, after we're told again that when the dragons are at their heights and there's dragons back in the world, we see that there is a lot of magic. But when that isn't apparent, there isn't any magic, really. Like, Dany's dragons coming back enabled a lot of that magic. But until then, there wasn't really much magic in Westeros. So I'm talking about in Westeros. I'm not talking Essos, whatever, Shy, whatever. So a lot of these Maesters having the idea that there is no magic, that these are all stories, is kind of realistic. That is the way a person that has been brought up as this, intelligent person would understand that magic's probably died off. So again, I don't really agree with some of his
degree with
points.
Rickard Stark's southern ambitions, and we'll talk about that in part 4.
Okay, so part 4, we're going to learn about southern ambitions and all that. Makes sense. I agreed, with the start of this video. I agreed with his premise of why the faith would go against the Targaryens, their reasoning, and how that could be inputted into something like the Dance of the Dragons or the Storming of the Dragon Pit. But I think in a lot of ways, there's just some common ideas of why people would be motivated to kill the Targaryens, or not maybe the Targaryens, but the dragons as well, and what those are, like I kind of explained in this video. And there were some other points with the faith that I just did not agree with in this video. But let me know what you guys think. I mean, I think these are all open to interpretation. We don't have any of confirmed answers. It's just my opinion, his opinion. Let me know what your guys' thoughts are. And again, I want to say, these were made before Fire and Blood. So more information has come out. This is why Preston Jacobs is kind of reviewing and doing more episodes of this. But I wanted to look at his original one. So let me know what you guys think. And that is the end of the video. Hope you guys all enjoyed. And I'll see you guys all in the next video. Bye, guys.